Well, then, thank you for coming and welcome to our webinar, Shifting Gears, Practical Tips for Teaching a Stage 1 Blended Class. My name is Dori Tarian and my co-host is Marijke Gertz. Marijke and I are content developers, but we've also have had experience teaching Link classes ranging from literacy all the way to Link 8. And we recently switched from developing modules for CLB 5, 6, and 7, 8 to stage 1. So first we developed a module for CLB 3, 4 about helping out at a community garden. And that took us a considerable step back from what we had been doing for stage 2. And after that, we shifted down even further and began developing units for CLB 1, 2, focusing on financial literacy. So this experience prompted us to present this webinar from the perspective of those who've been working with higher CLB levels and recently or now are switching to lower levels. So before we jump in, I would like to read the land acknowledgement. So New Language Solutions is based in Ottawa, Ontario. We acknowledge that our head office is on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabeg people. Beyond Ottawa, we have staff working in locations across Canada. New Language Solutions is grateful to have the opportunity to work as a guest in communities and territories across the country, and we honor the stewardship of the many Indigenous peoples who have resided on these lands since time immemorial. We make our acknowledgement as a sign of respect for all Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, past and present. We accept the true impact of the past and the pain suffered by generations of Indigenous peoples. As an agency that works to support the integration of newcomers into Canadian society and cultures, we resolve to support activities that are inclusive of Indigenous peoples. We make our best efforts to address a history of injustice to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We encourage our frontline staff and clients to discover whose traditional territories they live on and pause to reflect on the hospitality shown to us as guests in these territories. So I myself live in Vaughan, and the city of Vaughan is situated in the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
And I live in the beautiful Wolastoqey River Valley in New Brunswick, in the unceded traditional lands of the Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy peoples.
All right, let's take a look at the topics that we prepared for today's presentation. So first, Marijke is going to talk about class size and task duration. She's going to focus on the differences between stage 2 and stage 1. And then she's going to present the principles of backwards planning. I will talk about a couple of different online activity types and how to offer support to your stage 1 class. We will look at how to curate and adapt materials offered in the course builder, look at some useful resources and pages, and hopefully at the end, we'll have time for a brief discussion. I wanted to mention that throughout this presentation, we're going to refer to 2 units that we recently developed for CLB 1, 2, and that is using Canadian money while shopping and paying for school programs. Marijke, I will let you take it from here.
All right, thank you very much. I think everyone in the sector is affected by the changing in funding that many of us have experienced in the past year. And many teachers transitioned to teaching a lower level than maybe what they were used to. So one major difference, if your organization is following the PBLA guidelines, is that the number of learners in your stage 1 class should not be more than 20 instead of the 30 that you were used to. So you should have a slightly smaller class than in stage 2, which means that you can provide more support to individually to the learners, which they will need. However, during the upcoming flu and cold season, your class could suddenly get very small, as I can speak from experience. So let's look at some other differences between stage 1 and stage 2 in the CLB levels. So here you see some examples for task duration and length for CLB 7, 4, and 2. And you can see that if you were teaching CLB 7 and now CLB 4, what you can expect from your learners on an assessment is quite different. So Dori mentioned we've also had to shift gears in our development work, which involved a close reading of the CLB and what the statements actually mean. For example, we learned that for listening, a turn means one person saying something, just like in a game when you take a turn and I take a turn. So for CLB 2, a conversation of 4 turns is actually quite short. You can also see that for speaking, at CLB 4, the focus is on producing more fluent, connected speech. And for reading at CLB 2, the length is just a few sentences and it needs to be supported by visuals. Another example is how you need to pay close attention to what the CLB actually say. For CLB 4, for writing, a paragraph is a very basic paragraph. So maybe it's just a topic sentence followed by some details or an example. And a paragraph at CLB 4 is not the same as a paragraph at CLB 7. So since the assessment tasks are the final outcomes, that has a huge impact on what you do in class to prepare learners for that assessment, and even for the materials, or especially for the materials that you offer online. And Dori will look at that in a little bit. But just to reiterate, what you're teaching at a new level, it's really important to examine the benchmarks for that level. And Dori had already moved on to our next slide, which is all about backwards planning. So that should be at the heart of your curriculum, and doesn't mean that you're putting the cart in front of the horse, because you start with a needs assessment, the real world task goals. So you establish the tasks that learners want to be able to do in the real world. And then you look at the CLB and you use the CLB to formulate the assessment tasks. And you look at the evaluation and success criteria. Both the assessment task and the skill using should fit those criteria. And the skill using still has some scaffolding in place. To prepare learners to successfully complete the skill using and assessment task, you really have to pull apart the task to single skills and language focus items. And those become the skill building activities which make up the bulk of your unit. And if you're familiar with PBLA, even if you used to teach a stage 2 class, but if you're familiar with PBLA, then you understand the building blocks of module planning. So trust that you're a good teacher, because you got this. You know how to do it. When you're teaching a level that is new to you, it always helps to look at resources that others have made to get a feel for the level and how things fit together. So let's look at an example from one of our new units that Dori shared with you. So here's an example from paying for school programs. It's a CLB 1-2 unit. And the real world task goal for reading is to read a short message about a school program that requires payment, such as a hot lunch program or a fundraiser or a bake sale, or maybe there's an Indigenous storyteller coming to your school. So looking at the expectations for CLB 1-2, we found that this task best fit with getting things done. So then we look at the criteria for getting things done. And here you can see those criteria. And the ones in red are the step up for CLB 2. So when you're pulling apart the task and planning your skill building activities, you know that you will need to introduce vocabulary for amount, dates, and other words that indicate where and when. And you can also understand that you will need to include visuals with the very short text and practice strategies for using those visuals when you're scanning the text. Furthermore, a look at the language focus items and the language and learning strategies can be really helpful to understand what kind of grammar structures are important and what you can teach your learners at this level. So here's a snapshot from the index from this unit. And you can see that before you get to the assessment task, there are 3 skill building activities, and each of those tasks practices a different component. And the skill using puts those pieces back together again, and that's the activity reading a school flyer. Now here's an example. So with the information in mind about the different CLB levels, which one of these 2 flyers do you think is for CLB 2? And how do you know this? Well, we can see that, yep, the one on the left is for CLB 1. That's right. I was going to say we can see that the one on the right has a little bit more information. There's the red sentence that pops out, and even in this circle on the bottom right, there's a little bit more information. But both of these are quite short, and they're clearly supported by visuals. So you can also apply this backwards planning to your lessons. So let's look at another example from one of the new CLB 1-2 units, specifically the teaching notes for a writing skill building. In this activity, learners practice personal identification vocabulary, which they need to complete a school form. And they will begin to identify the layout and different parts of a form. But that's the end goal of this lesson. You can't just give them a form and ask them to complete it. So when you pull this task apart, first learners need to be familiar with the personal information vocabulary. And the note at the top of these teaching notes points to an activity from even another unit, which you could do before this one. And then in the online component, the vocabulary is reviewed and learners are slowly introduced to different parts of a form. There's an interactive video, but all they have to do there is just point and click to where certain information should go. For example, their child's name or the classroom. For the in-class activity, you then review the online activity, and then learners get to practice filling out the form that they saw in the video, and they fill it out themselves. So if you're used to teaching a higher level, you may feel that you're repeating things a lot, like it's so repetitive, you're doing the same thing over and over. But what you're doing is spiraling up. You come back to the same activity and you add a little bit every time until the learners have achieved the goal for this lesson. The teaching notes also include suggestions for additional practice in case you want to take it even further. When you backwards plan your lesson, make sure to read the teaching notes and to look at the online and in-class activities so that you can decide how much support or extra practice your learners will need. And Dori has lots of suggestions on how to do that.
Thank you, Marijke. That's right. So we just talked about planning units and lessons in terms of tasks and different language skills. But what about the online activities? In Avenue, there are lots of different types of activities built into the units and modules. And depending on your role, you can even create and add your own content. So the question is, how do you choose? How do you decide whether an activity is right for your class? So a few things to keep in mind are, is the activity practical and straightforward, but still engaging? Does it provide more than one type of input, like audio and visual? Does it appeal to different learning styles without being overly complicated? Personally, I find the first two especially important for stage one. At stage two, like CLB 7 or 8, teachers can use longer readings with fewer visual support. But if you're not used to that difference, it's easy to overlook. Of course, no matter the level, activities still need a gradual introduction and some demonstration. We're going to look at that in more detail in a few slides. For now, let's take a look at some examples, some activity types. Marijke talked about planning earlier, so I'd like to start with an activity that works really well for needs assessment, and that is called choice. Even though the questionnaire activity can also be used for surveys because it allows to combine different types of questions like multiple choice and open-ended, for lower CLB levels, we find that choice is a better fit. And that's because it keeps things simple. There is one question with a couple answer options. You can display the options, the answer options, either vertically, like you see on the slide here, or horizontally. We usually recommend a vertical format just because it's clearer for learners. In this particular example, choice is used for needs assessment in the Paying for School Programs unit. But the question you ask your class can be really about anything. It can be about topics that learners are interested in, skills that they want to practice, or something fun, like organizing a class potluck. The next activity type that I want to talk about is a lot more versatile. It's H5P. H5P is one of the most common activity types in the course builder units. And as you can see on the slide, it's also our top choice for skill building. This screenshot comes from the Using Canadian Money unit. So H5P comes in many different formats, but the one that we use most often is called Course Presentation. You're probably familiar with it. It's the one where learners move from slide to slide horizontally. This format, we think, works really well because it can combine different types of input: pictures, videos, interactive activities, audio support, and text, of course. Learners can retry the activities as many times as they want to. And because each slide is fairly small, the amount of information is easy to manage. And while we're on the topic of manageable chunks, it's worth adding that at this level, we recommend keeping a course presentation to about 10 slides. So let me show you an example from the same unit using Canadian Money. So this slide is from a skill building activity called Counting from 1 to 100. It's a pretty good skill to have when you're using Canadian Money. It's a great example because it supports both audio and visual learning. So learners can read and listen to the instructions, and they can also read and listen to the numbers. It helps build digital literacy skills, like knowing where to click or how to complete the drag and drop activity. And it provides immediate feedback and score explanations. So just one click and the learner can see what's correct or incorrect. And as I said earlier, it allows for retries. So learners can listen to the audio again and redo the activity as many times as they need to. And there's no time restriction either. So this is what I meant earlier when I said simple and practical. At CLB 1-2, we want short instructions, a few items per activity, like 4 here, so it doesn't become overwhelming. And while I would love to show you half a dozen more examples of H5Ps, in the interest of time, let's move on to another activity type. Glossary. Now, glossaries aren't usually built into the units in the course builder, so this is something that you would need to add yourself. Let's take a look at this glossary. This is from the CLB 3-4 unit, Helping at a School Garden. This unit introduces a lot of vocabulary around plants and gardening tools, where visuals come in handy. So using the glossary activity, learners can collaborate to create a unit vocabulary list by adding a photo, a screenshot, or any image file to accompany a word and entry. And it doesn't stop there. The glossary entry can also include simple definitions, example sentences, a synonym, and even audio files so that learning can practice pronunciation. And speaking of pronunciation, behind the next door is an activity called Poodll Read Aloud. So this one is designed to support both listening and speaking skills. And as you can see, it has 3 sections: listen, practice, and read. Again, this example is from the gardening unit. In this activity, learners practice 5 sentences. So in the first section, they listen and read the sentences. Then in the second part, they listen and repeat each sentence one by one. And finally, for the last part, they record themselves reading the sentences. And again, similar to H5P, each step can be repeated as many times as they like, which makes it a great activity for skill building. And at the end, learners receive feedback on their recording, including scores across different criteria. And last but not least, the Moodle quiz. Most quiz questions are closed-ended and automatically marked, like multiple choice, matching, ordering, true or false. But with that said, quizzes can also work really well for speaking and writing assessments, especially at lower levels. Why? Because quizzes allow you to include more support to set learners up for success. So on this slide, for example, you see a speaking assessment question. So it's just one question from the quiz. Here, learners can read the instructions, then listen to a question, which is the audio file on the top, look at the photo of the speaker, and then record their response to the question. And because quizzes can include multiple questions, learners could listen to, let's say, 3 questions and record their responses one by one. We looked at 5 different online activity types, and that's really only a very small sample. But even with these 5, that's 5 different kinds of navigation, 5 sets of instructions, and 5 ways of building digital skills. In other words, for new learners, it's quite a lot. So the next question is, how can we best support our learners to feel confident with these tools, with these activities, and get the most out of them? So here I wanted to focus on 4 items. Maybe later we can have a discussion about your preferred methods as well. So I want to talk about completing activities together, repeating them, demonstrating, and the use of tutorials. The first 2 points go together. So first, complete an activity together in class. Ideally, you can do this with the help of a smart board, but it works just as well using a projector. Let's say you go through an H5P course presentation or a quiz. Learners can take turns to click, drag and drop, type, etc. And then repeat the next point, assign the same activity for homework. Not something similar, exactly the same. Have learners repeat the same steps at home, becoming independent and confident Avni users. And the way Avni is set up, you can see online how many learners submitted answers to a task, and you can have an idea of how much more support they need, how much more repetition would be useful. So completing the activities together during in-class session and then assigning them for homework provides the most support, but you can still provide support with limited in-person time. In that case, you may choose to share your screen and show how certain activities work during a synchronous online session, or use simple, short tutorials. Screen sharing is the quickest way to show something, but what if someone missed your class, or they just simply want to see the process again? On the slide now, you can see an example of what I mean by tutorials. So this is just one screenshot with a couple of arrows. You can add very brief instructions, click here, type here, and so on. And if you prefer, you can even record a short screencast. And again, just keep it very brief, simple explanations, slow movements. And you can post either the screenshot or the screencast in an announcement for everyone to access. And of course, there is the Avenue help block that already has a collection of help files. So these were really only a few ways of supporting your learners. And let's just go back to materials for a minute or two, and let's talk about previewing units in the course builder. So if you're transitioning from stage 1 from stage 2 to stage 1, you might be less familiar with the available units in the course builder. And there are a lot of units available for stage 1. And previewing them is no small feat. So here are a few things to keep in mind. Focus on the outcomes and what you want learners to be able to do. Again, let's go back to the backwards planning and keep the outcomes in mind. By clicking on the info button on the unit tile in the course builder, you can read a brief description and the learning outcomes. This is important for backwards planning that we talked about earlier. This will help determine if the unit outcomes will support the real-world task goals that you want to work towards. And when you click on the I button, you can preview the unit. So this means that you can take a closer look at all the activities and try them out yourself. This will give you a deeper understanding of the unit content. And here you will also find all the teacher resources. In most units, you can find unit plans with tips on how to teach the unit, lesson plans, printable handouts, and so on. And the developer is also displayed on the tile. So once you're familiar with the developer's style and layout, and find a couple that works well for your class, the unit review process will be much faster. And just a side note here, so New Language Solutions follows the same template for units as CCLB. All right, and let's say that you went to the course builder and found the units that you want to use, and it's still not 100% what you need. So then there are a number of ways to adapt your materials. Of course, you can hide, unhide, and move activities on the course page. Unhiding a limited number of activities at a time will make it easier for learners to find the activities, and moving the current topic always to the top of your course page will make it easier for learners. They will have to scroll a lot less, which can take up quite some time if you're using a cell phone, for example. Many of the units in the course builder come with printable handouts, and a lot of them are even offered in editable files, so Word files. So you can edit these files. Let's say you can increase the font size, add little illustrations, or add extra practice. Or you can make them relevant to your geographical area if you find that your needs are a little bit different than the default. And of course, if you have an editing teacher role, you can make changes to the online activities as well. You can add a couple slides to an H5P, or add some of the activities that we just looked at a couple of slides ago. So we are slowly coming to the end of our presentation, but before we wrap it all up, Marijke has a couple more resources to share.
Yes, thanks, Dori. So we've only given you a few suggestions for teaching a stage 1 link class on Avenue. And if you're just getting acquainted with this level, there's several pages that we like to recommend. First of all, I already mentioned the CLB book. Here you can find a lot more than just the benchmarks. So there's one page that you should refer back to, and that's the Profiles of Abilities page, which shows the 4 levels side by side, and it's at the beginning of the stage 1 section. And another page is the Features of Communication page, which I used in that slide where I compared CLB 7, 4, and 2. Again, the 4 levels are side by side, so you can quickly see how learners progress through, how things get like more complicated or how readings get longer, and what you can expect from your learners at each level. And you can find the features of communication at the end of the stage 1 section, so after CLB 4. Then there's the National Link Curriculum Guidelines. This is a great resource where you can find lots of sample tasks, and some of them have even been really worked out in detail so that you can download it and just use it. Next is the Avenue Help Center, also called the Knowledge Base. And here you can find help files for just about everything that you can do on Avenue. So if you wanted to look up how to add a choice activity or use that as a needs assessment, or how to use the announcement forum to post a tutorial for a certain task, then you can find help files in the Help Center. And last but not least, you can also check out our YouTube channel where you will find recordings of past webinars, for example, about using Avenue with literacy learners. And there's also help videos for learners that show step-by-step how to do specific activities, such as even logging into Avenue. So if you're interested in learning more about best practices, which we've mentioned some of them in our presentation, you can take a free PD course that iSense and NLS have developed, and it's best practices for synchronous and blended learning. You can reach out to Anita Premkumar at iSense, and her email address is on the slide, but you can also reach out to me and I can connect you with her.
Yes.
We appreciate everybody who is here and everybody who's watching this webinar online. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and have fun teaching your new class.